On the 11th of September, at 10 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, a 44-year-old accountant named Warren Ashby keyed a handheld radio from a ridge in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest and told his wife he was at a turnaround, that it was beautiful up there, that he would be down by 4 and she should start the grill. He was on a used trail. He was 90 minutes from his car and the weather was good. But he never returned. 9 days of searching found only one thing: a bright blue water bottle, standing upright on a flat rock a mile and a half further up the mountain, in the opposite direction from his car, from the trailhead, from his wife, from every single thing a man wants when he says he is coming home. There was no pack, there were no boots, there was no Warren Ashby. The file claims the disappearance was due to the rain and exposure, and was swiftly closed. But the bizarre details about his case kept coming, and perhaps the name of the location itself is the most indicative.
This one is called the Dark Divide, and it has been called that since long before anyone thought there was money in being afraid of the woods. It sits up in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, wedged in the high broken ground between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams, and it is one of the largest roadless areas left in the state. No paved road crosses its core, no power line, no town. There are trails on the map, thin dotted lines that a ranger drew decades ago, and a lot of those trails do not exist anymore in any way your boots would recognize. They fade into elk track, and then into nothing, and the nothing goes on for a long, long way. Over a period of about 15 years, a string of people walked into that country and came out changed or did not come out at all. Warren Ashby, 44, an accountant from Vancouver, Washington, on a maintained trail on an easy September afternoon. 2 elk hunters named in a recovered notebook as Roy Dietrich and Merle Haugen, both experienced, both from families who had hunted the Gifford Pinchot for generations. A wildlife technician named Elias Corder, a professional skeptic who went up there with a grid of 12 cameras to prove there was nothing to find. An ultra runner named Sawyer Vance, and a family of 4 at a drive-in campground on the outer edge who packed up in the dark and drove home before dawn. Some of them were never found at all. One of them was found sitting in the middle of a forest road at dawn, 20 miles from where he started, and has never been able to say how he got there. And one of them left early and nothing happened to them, and that is the case that tells you the most. Every file was closed. Exposure, a fall, misadventure in difficult terrain. Every file has a reason written in it, and every reason is plausible. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you the reasons are wrong. I am going to tell you that the same 3 details appear across all of them, in people who never met, and that nobody ever put the files next to each other. They came out of the ground the way these things always do, late and sideways. Search and rescue paperwork obtained through records requests. A hunter's notebook recovered from a camp nobody came back to. And 12 memory cards pulled out of a dead man's camera grid, read weeks later by another technician at a safe desk far away. What follows is drawn from those documents case by case in the order they were filed. By the end, I want you to understand something that the search and rescue reports will never say out loud. The Dark Divide does not take people the way the movies take people. There is no screaming, there is no chase you can hear. It takes them the way still water takes a stone, quietly, completely, and it almost never gives you an ending. Let me take you back. The name comes first, and the name is old. Cartographers had the Dark Divide on paper generations before the internet decided the Pacific Northwest was crawling with something. The ridge earns it. The timber up there is old growth in the true sense, Douglas fir and hemlock that were tall when this country had no name in English. And it grows so close and so high that on the floor of it, at midday in summer, you walk in a kind of green dusk. The light comes down filtered and dead. Sound behaves strangely under a canopy like that. A shout does not carry, a scream does not carry, and it is enormous. You can walk for 2 days and cross no road, meet no person, and pass no place where a helicopter could safely put down. Right on the shoulder of it is a gash in the rock called Ape Canyon. That name is not new either. In the summer of 1924, a group of miners were camped up there working a claim, and they came down out of the hills with a story that got printed in the Oregonian and never entirely went away. That for a night something had thrown rocks at their cabin, that they had heard heavy things moving and calling in the dark, that at one point a great hairy shape had reached in, and that they had fired their rifles into it, and it had not gone down like a thing should go down. They called them mountain devils. The canyon has been Ape Canyon on the map ever since. I am not telling you the miners were right. I am telling you that people have been coming down off that particular divide with the same shape of story for 100 years, and that the ground itself was named for darkness before any of them opened their mouths. And I want to be honest with you about the ordinary explanations because they matter, and because I think a story like this is worthless if it only shows you one side. The Dark Divide really is one of the most genuinely dangerous pieces of country in the lower 48, and none of that danger has anything to do with anything hairy. The terrain does most of the killing without help. There are drainages up there where a creek has cut a slot 10, 15 feet deep, and the brush has grown over the top of it into a solid green roof, so that you can be walking on what looks like a hillside and step onto nothing and drop into a stone throat that no searcher will ever look down. The weather turns without warning. A warm afternoon in September becomes a wet 40-degree night that will take a soaked, twisted ankle hiker before dawn. There is no cell coverage anywhere in the core. The old roads that would have let a rescue vehicle in were decommissioned decades ago and are alder thickets now. Every year, all over the American West, people die in country exactly like this for reasons that have a name and a cause and a coroner's signature. Most of them are never dramatic, and most of them barely make the local paper. So when I lay these cases out for you, I'm not asking you to throw the ordinary explanation away. I'm asking you to hold it in one hand while you hold the pattern in the other, and to notice the specific places where the ordinary explanation has to strain. A man falls in a slot canyon, fine. But why did he walk uphill, away from home, to do it? Exposure takes a lost hunter, fine. But why did the survivor say his partner stopped rather than fell? These are the seams. The ordinary explanation covers the whole cloth except right at the seams, and the seams are where I want you to look. There's a ranger I'll call Halverson, who worked that district for the better part of 30 years, and Halverson is a skeptic, the kind of career Forest Service man who has personally carried more than one body out of that country and has no patience at all for the online crowd who come looking to be scared. Halverson will tell you flatly that the Dark Divide kills people because it is steep and cold and trackless and people are careless. Full stop. But Halverson will also tell you, if you get him late enough and honest enough, that of all the districts he worked in a long career, that one had a feel the others didn't. That the search dogs behaved differently up there. That they would work a scent line beautifully right up to a certain point on certain slopes and then simply refuse, sit down or circle, or turn back to the handler as though the trail had not ended but had gone somewhere the dog was not willing to follow. He has no explanation for it. He does not offer one. He just says the dogs knew something about that ground that he didn't. and he learned, over the years, to trust the dogs. Now the cases. I have 5 for you, and they cover about 15 years. None of them made the news the way you would think a disappearance makes the news, because none of them were dramatic enough, and that is exactly the pattern. A person does not have to vanish in a puff of smoke to vanish. They just have to vanish somewhere that has a reasonable-sounding explanation waiting, and the dark divide always has one waiting. Watch how the same 3 details keep surfacing across people who never met: the watching, the smell, and the sounds that answer you. The first case, the day hiker, his name was Warren Ashby. September, a Tuesday, good weather. This was a man doing an easy thing on an easy day. Ashby was 44, an accountant out of Vancouver, Washington, and he was not some novice wandering off into the deep country. He was on a marked out and back on the western edge of the divide, a maintained trail, the kind of hike people do in running shoes. He carried a handheld radio because there is no cell signal up there, and his wife liked to hear from him. At 1:10 in the afternoon, he keyed that radio from a ridge and told her he was at the turnaround, that it was beautiful, that he'd be down by 4, and to start the grill. He did not come down by 4. He did not come down at all. The search started that night and ran for 9 days. Here's what they found. They found his water bottle, a bright blue thing, easy to spot, sitting upright on a flat rock. It was not near the turnaround. It was 3/4 of a mile past the turnaround, uphill, deeper into the roadless country, in a direction Ashby had no reason on earth to go. He had told his wife he was heading home. Everything about the man said home. And then he had apparently turned around and walked the wrong way, deliberately uphill into the dark of the timber, and set his water bottle down neatly on a rock as he went. They never found anything else. No boot, no pack, no Warren Ashby. The terrain team said it was possible he'd taken a fall into one of the drainages where the brush closes over the top of a ravine like a lid, and that a body could lie 10 feet from a searcher and never be seen. That is a true thing about that country, and it is the explanation that went in the file. Here's the part that is not in the file because it is not the kind of thing that goes in a file. The Ashbys had a dog, a shepherd mix named Gus, and Gus had not gone on the hike. He'd been home the whole day. 3 days into the search, Gus turned up missing from the yard and came back on his own the following morning. Unhurt, no burrs, no mud, as though he had simply gone somewhere clean and come home. And from that morning on, for the rest of his life, that dog would not get in the family car, would not go near it. A dog that had ridden in that car since he was a puppy would flatten himself to the driveway and refuse. The car that had driven Warren Ashby to the trailhead 100 times. You can do anything you want with that. I'm just telling you it is true, and that his wife tells it to this day. The second case, the elk hunters. 2 men, both experienced, both from families that had hunted the Gifford Pinchot for generations. I'll call them by the names in the recovered notebook: Roy Dietrich and Merle Haugen. This was late October, elk season, and they had packed into the eastern shoulder of the divide to a spot Roy's father had hunted before him. They were not lost men. They were not city men playing at the woods. They knew that ground as well as anyone alive knows it. We know what happened over their 4 nights up there because Roy kept a notebook, a habit from his father, and the notebook came out even though Roy did not. I am going to read you the shape of it. Night 1 is ordinary. Weather, where they glassed, and elk they passed on because the shot was bad. Ordinary hunting. Night 2, 1 line near the bottom of the page, herd knocking after dark. Wood on wood, answered our axe when we split kindling. Every time we hit, something hit back, off the ridge. Merle thinks it's an echo. It is not an echo. Night 3 is longer, and the handwriting is worse. smell in camp all evening, like a wet dog rolled in something dead, comes and goes with the wind, the horses will not settle. And then lower, rocks in the fire, twice, nobody threw them. They came from upslope into the light and landed in the coals. First one we thought was a pop from the wood. Second one hit the pot. We are being told to leave. Merle wants to hunt the morning. I want to go now. There is no night 4 entry. There's the start of one, the date, and 2 words. Merle went, and then nothing. Merle Haugen walked out, alone on the 5th day. And he was not right, and he never really got right again. He would not say what had happened to Roy. The one thing he ever said to the deputy who found him coming down the logging spur at the edge of the forest with no rifle and no pack, the one thing was this. He said, "I heard him stop." Not, "I heard him fall." Not, "I heard him scream." "I heard him stop." And he would not explain what that meant, and I have thought about it for a long time, and I am not sure I want to know. There were no charges. What would the charge be? 2 experienced men go into the backcountry and 1 comes out. The county logged Roy Dietrich as lost, presumed dead, terrain and exposure, and closed it. His notebook went to his widow. She is the reason we know any of it. The third case, the man who set the cameras, and now we come back around to the footage because this is where it comes from. After the hunters and after a couple of other quiet incidents I don't have time to lay out in full, a pair of backpackers who bailed out in the middle of the night and drove home without their tent, a solo trail runner who was found sitting in the middle of a forest road at dawn 20 miles from where he'd started and could not say how. After all of that, a wildlife technician named Elias Corder got interested in the eastern Dark Divide. Corder was a skeptic, and I want to be fair to him because the skepticism is on the record and it matters. He worked seasonal contracts doing wildlife surveys, camera trap grids for cougar and elk density studies, that kind of thing. In an email to a colleague that later got read back in the review, he wrote that he thought the divide stuff was, and I'm quoting him, pattern-hungry people in bad light. He thought the hunters had spooked themselves. He thought Ashby fell in a hole. He was a data man. He wanted to put cameras up there precisely because he believed the cameras would show nothing month after month and that the nothing would be the point. So he built a grid, a dozen trail cameras strapped to trees across a few square miles of the eastern shoulder, motion triggered, the kind that fire off a short clip when something crosses the frame. He'd hike in every few weeks and swap the cards and the batteries and come home with footage of deer, footage of elk, footage of a black bear scratching its back on a stump. And exactly as he predicted, nothing else. For most of a season, nothing else. You already know where this is going. You have already seen the last card he pulled. The camera that filmed the seated creature was Corder's. It was in his grid. The timestamps and the card metadata put it beyond argument. And when the review board sat down and matched the man in the frame against everything they had, the olive shirt, the green day pack, the dark hair, the build, the rude in, the man backing away from the creature with his hand up was Elias Corder. He was servicing his own camera. That is why he was there, alone, on foot, on that slope. He had hiked in to swap the card in the very device that was, at that moment, recording him. And the reason the footage exists at all, the reason we get to watch it, is that the camera kept running after he backed off. It fired its clip, it caught the rise and the walk, and it caught him retreating out of frame to the right. And then it kept sitting there on its tree faithfully for 11 more days, filming an empty slope, filming the deer come back, filming the light change, waiting for Elias Corder to come and collect the proof he never believed he'd get. He never came. Another tech pulled the card. The skeptic got his data. That is the thing I cannot get past. Elias Corder spent a season trying to prove the Dark Divide was empty, and the single most convincing piece of evidence anyone has ever recorded of what is up there exists, because he did not survive to file it. The proof and the price were the same event, but the seated creature is not the only thing his grid caught. And this is the part that almost nobody talks about, because the walking giant is so overwhelming that people stop reading the rest of the cards. There were 11 other cameras, and when the review board pulled all of them and laid the timestamps out on one timeline, a shape emerged that is, in its quiet way, worse than the thing on Corder's own camera. For most of the season, the other cameras behaved exactly as a wildlife tech would predict. Deer at dawn and dusk, elk moving through in the cool of the morning. A bear, a bobcat, coyotes, the ordinary traffic of a healthy forest, hundreds of clips of animals doing animal things, normal, empty of anything strange, right up until the last week. In the last week, the animals stopped. Not gradually, not the way animals thin out when a cougar moves into a drainage, over days, cautiously. They stopped almost all at once. Across the whole grid, in the span of about 36 hours, the deer clips and the elk clips and the small mammal clips simply ceased, on camera after camera, as though something had passed through that entire piece of country and every living thing that could leave had left. The forest went quiet in front of a dozen lenses at the same time. Whatever the deer knew, they all knew it together, and they all acted on it, and they were gone. And in the gap they left behind, on 3 of the cameras, not Corder's, 3 others, spread across better than a mile of ground, something crossed the frame at night that the board's report describes only as large bipedal, unidentified, insufficient for classification, which is bureaucratic language for we are not going to write down what we think this is. On one of them, it is only a leg and a swing of arm at the edge of the infrared, there and gone. On another, it is a back, an enormous dark back filling the frame as it passes close to the lens, and you cannot see the top of it because the top of it is above the frame. And the timestamps on those 3 clips, when you lay them in order, march across the grid in a straight line over the course of that quiet last week in one direction. Toward the camera on the slope, toward Corder's camera, as if something had walked the length of his grid, clearing the country ahead of it, and arrived. Corder hiked in to service that slope camera on the last day of that timeline. He was walking on foot, alone, into the exact place that a week of clips shows something very large had been walking toward. He could not have known. The clips were on the cards, and the cards were in the cameras, and he was hiking in to collect them. He was walking into the data. The skeptic got his proof. He just never got to read it. Another tech read it for him weeks later, safe at a desk, laying out 12 cameras worth of timestamps and watching the forest empty and the shape march across the grid toward the man. And I am told that tech does not do field work in the Gifford Pinchot anymore either. The 4th case, the trail runner on the road. I mentioned him in passing, and I want to come back to him because his is the case that gets under people who think they've heard everything. And it's the one that made a search and rescue volunteer I'll call Okafor stop volunteering. His name was Sawyer Vance, and he was an ultra runner. That is a specific kind of person, the kind who runs 40, 50, 60 miles in a day, through country that most people would need a week to backpack. Alone, fast, light, no tent, no stove, just water and gels and shoes. Vance ran a big loop that clipped the northern edge of the divide, a route he'd done before. He started before dawn from a pull-out on a forest road with a plan to be back to his car by early afternoon. He carried a GPS watch. That watch is the whole reason this case is strange rather than just sad. He was found the next morning alive, sitting cross-legged in the middle of a forest road at first light, roughly 20 miles by road from where he had started, and completely unable to account for himself. Not injured, not hypothermic in any way that explained it. Dehydrated, scraped up, but essentially fine in body. In mind, he was somewhere else entirely. He kept asking the people who found him what time it was, and then not reacting to the answer and asking again a minute later. He could not say how he'd gotten to that road. The last thing he clearly remembered was running a ridge in daylight and feeling, in his words, that the woods had gone quiet in a way that woods don't. He remembered stopping running. He did not remember starting again. Here is the watch. The GPS track shows his clean, fast, sensible loop for the first 18 miles, and then, at a point up on the divide, it shows him leave the route. Not gradually, it shows him turn 90 degrees off his line and go straight into the roadless timber, off any trail. And then the track becomes something that no runner produces. The pace drops to a walk and then to a crawl. The line wanders, doubles back, loops on itself, goes uphill when there is an easier down, holds for long, motionless stretches. And it covers, over the course of the entire night, a distance that a man of his ability should have covered in under 2 hours, except that it did not go anywhere. It went deep into the divide, in a slow, tangled scrawl for hours, in the dark. And then near dawn, it came out of the timber onto the road where he was found 20 miles from his car and stopped. Okafor was on the team that found him. And Okafor is the one who pulled the track off the watch. And the thing that Okafor could never square, the thing that made Okafor quit, was the character of that line. Okafor had seen the tracks of a lot of lost people. Lost people have a signature. They panic, they speed up, they make bad straight-line decisions toward imagined roads, they circle when they're exhausted. This was not that. This line, Okafor said, did not look like a man who was lost. It looked like a man who was being walked, slow, patient, meandering, in no particular hurry, deep into country a runner would never choose, all night, and then delivered to a road at dawn and left there. Like something taking a dog on a very long leash for a very long walk, and then dropping the leash. Vance got most of his mind back over the following weeks, but not that night and not that turn off the trail, which never came back at all. He does not run in the mountains anymore. He runs on roads now in town where the sight lines are long, and he has never been able to explain to a single person who has asked him why an experienced ultra runner in the full daylight of a good afternoon turned 90 degrees off a route he knew by heart and walked slowly into the dark divide. The fifth case, the family that left. I want to give you one that ends differently, because the difference is the whole point. A family, 2 parents, 2 kids, a dog, car camped for a long weekend at a developed site on the very outer edge of the divide. Not deep, not off trail, a drive-in campground with a pit toilet and a fee envelope. The kind of place nothing is supposed to happen. They left a day and a half early. The reason they left is that the children would not stop saying that someone was standing at the tree line at night. The first night, the younger one said it, and the parents said it was a stump, go to sleep. The second night, both children said it, independently, and pointed to the same spot. The father took a flashlight to the edge of the trees and found nothing. But he came back to the fire and he was quiet. And later, he would admit that while he was standing out there at the edge of the light, he had smelled something wet and rank and close, and had felt in a way he could not defend and did not enjoy, absolutely certain that he was being looked at from about 8 feet away by something that was choosing not to move. They packed up in the dark. They drove home before dawn. Nothing happened to them. That is the case. That is the whole case. Nothing happened to them, and they are all still alive. And that is why I saved it for last. Because when you put it next to the others, you finally see the shape of the thing. The dark divide let them feel it, and then it let them go. So here's the pattern laid flat. The disappearances cluster, not randomly across 100 square miles, but on the same handful of slopes, the same drainages, the eastern and western shoulders where the old growth comes down to meet the open ground. Ashby's Bottle, the Hunter's Camp, Corder's Grid, Vance's Tangled Line, you could nearly cover them with one hand on the map. The survivors describe the same three things, and they describe them without having compared notes, across years, people who never met. The feeling of being watched from just inside the trees, the smell, wet animal, and rot coming and going on the wind. And the sounds that answer you, the knock that comes back when you knock, the rock that lands in your fire, the thing that stops when the man stops. And the endings are all the same ending, which is no ending, no remains, no wound to point to, no moment of violence anyone witnessed. Just a person who was on the slope and then was a line in a file, terrain, exposure, presumed, closed. The rational explanation is right there, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending it isn't. That country is genuinely lethal. The drainages really do close over like lids. The cold really does kill people who twist an ankle 2 miles from anyone. Old-growth timber really will hide a body 10 feet from a searcher's boot. Every single one of these cases has a boring, terrestrial, tragic explanation, and if you take them one at a time, the boring explanation wins every time. You're just not supposed to take them one at a time. And when you stack them, when you lay Ashby on top of the hunters, on top of the runner, on top of the family, on top of a skeptic, with a camera grid who caught, on the last card, a thing rising up off the ground to its full impossible height and walking toward him with the unhurried confidence of something that has never in its life been afraid. The boring explanation starts to feel less like a conclusion and more like a thing people write down so they can stop looking. That camera is in an evidence box now. The card has been copied and the copies have gotten out, which is the only reason you're seeing it. The original sits in the dark in a county building with a case number and the word unattributed next to a description of a man nobody has claimed. And the dark divide is still there. Still roadless, still one of the largest untracked spaces left in the state. The trails still fade into elk track and then into nothing, and the nothing still goes on for a long, long way, under a canopy so high and so close that at noon in July you walk in a green dusk where a shout does not carry.
People still go in. There is a whole community of them now, drawn by exactly the footage you just watched, hiking to Corder's Grid to stand where he stood, to find a tree, to feel the same exact thing. Most of them do come out. They come out with nothing on their cameras but deer, and they go home a little disappointed, maybe a little relieved, and they tell everyone the dark divide is just woods. But some of them set their water bottle down on a rock in the wrong direction, uphill, and are never heard from again. And they do get a line in a file that says only unknown, and become the reason the next video gets made. The cameras do not move. They never moved. They just sat on a tree and recorded what walked into the frame, patiently, without fear, the way that country takes everything. Quietly, completely, and without ever once giving you an ending. That is why people are scared to camp in the dark divide. And they should be. Real or fake, you decide. There is an area in the far northern corner of California, up against the Oregon line, called the Marble Mountains. It is named for the stone. There is real marble in those peaks, pale gray and white, and where you have marble in wet mountains, you have caves, because water eats marble the way it eats limestone, slowly over ages, hollowing the mountains out from the inside. The marbles are riddled with them, sinks and shafts and passages that nobody has ever fully mapped, openings in the rock that a person could walk past 100 times and never see. And in August, 3 men went in there on foot. They were not researchers and they were not chasing anything really. Wade Merrick, Silas Boone, and Emmett Trask, all in their early 30s, friends since high school, who had hiked together every summer for 15 years and were running out of new country to hike. 2 of them came back to the truck, but at the end, one of them did not.
The sheriff's office worked it as a missing person in rough terrain, which is what it looked like, and which is what it was closed as. There are 100 ways to die in the marbles that have nothing to do with anything, and every one of them was on the table. What was not on the table was the account the surviving witness gave because he did not give it. Not to the deputies, not at the time, and not for a long while after. Of the 2 who walked out, only one has ever said a word about what happened up there. The other has never spoken about it publicly, and as far as I can establish, never will. This account comes from the one who talks. It comes from what he told people privately over the years, and from a recording made much later, once he had decided he was done carrying it alone. He starts it 6 hours before anything went wrong, and he asks that you hold one thing in your head the whole way through. Everyone who tells this story online tells it as a story about a body on a hillside. He says the body was never the point. The body was the thing that got their attention while something else was deciding what to do with them. That country is Bigfoot country in the old deep sense. The Klamath and the Six Rivers Forest next door are where the most famous piece of film in the whole phenomenon was shot, on a creek not far from where these 3 men parked their truck. People in that country have been talking about the big, hairy men in the hills for as long as there have been people in that country. The tribes whose land this is had names for them long before any of the rest of it. Wade Merrick was the one with the phone. He filmed everything, always had. The running joke was that Wade experienced their entire friendship through a 4-inch screen. Silas Boone was the strong one, the one who carried more than his share and never mentioned it. The one who always walked toward a thing while the other 2 were still deciding. And Emmett Trask was the careful one, the one who read the maps at night by headlamp when the others were asleep, the one who always knew where the water was and how far back the truck was and which way was out. Remember Emmett. Emmett is the reason there is a story to tell. They had gone off trail. That was the mistake. Though it did not feel like a mistake, it felt like the good part. They'd done the marked loop years before, and this time they wanted the country nobody walked. So they'd left the trail on the 3rd morning and cut cross-slope toward a ridge that on the map was just blank green. Following a shortcut Emmett had worked out that would drop them into a drainage on the far side and save a day. And for a few hours it was everything they'd wanted. Silence. Old timber. Not a boot print, not a candy wrapper, not a cut stump. Country that did not know people. Then they started finding the signs, though they didn't call them signs at the time. They didn't have a word for them yet. The first was the saplings, a stand of young trees, wrist thick, that had been broken over at about the height of a man's head, not cut, not fallen, broken and twisted the way you'd wring out a towel, and bent down and woven together into something that was almost a shape and almost nothing. Silas said a bear. Emmett didn't say anything. Wade filmed it because Wade filmed everything, and later that footage would matter to the people trying to reconstruct the day. But at the time, it was just a weird thing in the woods, and they walked on. Then the smell, downwind of the ridge, a stench rolled over them and rolled off again, wet and rank and organic, wet dog and something dead under it, there and then gone with the shift of the air. Silas gagged. Emmett stopped walking and stood very still for a moment, the way an animal stops, and then said quietly that maybe they should think about turning back and picking up the trail. Wade and Silas laughed at him, not cruelly. They just laughed in the way friends do at the careful one, and they kept going up toward the ridge, toward the smell, because the way out that Emmett wanted was back and the country they'd come to see was ahead. There were other signs between the smell and the track, and Emmett cataloged every one of them out loud while the other two waved him off, and every one of them turned out later to be a line drawn tighter around the three of them. There was a game trail that was too wide and too worn for deer, beaten into the duff by something heavy that used it often. There was a boulder the size of a chest freezer that had been rolled. You could see the socket of dirt it had come out of, and the drag scar. Nothing short of a truck winch or something with hands and a terrible amount of strength moves a rock like that, and there was no truck within 10 miles of trail. There was a smear of coarse, reddish hair caught on a splintered branch, at a height none of them could reach with their arms straight up. Emmett took a picture of the hair. Silas said it was elk. Emmett, who read everything, said elk do not have hair like that and do not shed it 8 feet off the ground. And Silas said Emmett thought too much, and they kept climbing because the country they had come to see was ahead, and the boring safe country was behind, and that arithmetic never once changed for either of the two who did not make it back whole. And then, near the top, in a scatter of red dirt between the rocks, Silas found the track. One track, pressed deep into the soft ground, sharp-edged, fresh. Longer than his own boot by half again, broad across the ball, 5 clear toes. They all stood and looked at it. Nobody laughed at Emmett this time. Wade filmed it with his boot in the frame for scale, and you can hear him on that clip, his voice gone strange and careful, saying, okay, that's okay. And you can hear Emmett, off to the side, say the thing that turned out to be the truest thing anyone said all day. He said, if that's fresh, we don't want to find the thing that made it. We want to find it a lot less than it wants to find us. They found it about 4 minutes later. They came over the top of the ridge and down into the head of the drainage on the far side. And there, laid out on the red slope at the base of a big dark trunk, was the body. You have seen the next part. That is the part Wade filmed. But knowing what led up to it changes it, so let me put you back inside it now that you know who these men are. When they came over the ridge and saw the auburn body, the fear that had been building since the saplings did the strangest thing. It flipped over into awe, because a fresh track means a live one, close, and a live one close is the thing every nerve in your body is screaming about. But a body, a dead one, laid out, not moving, a dead one is safe. A dead one is the discovery of the century, lying still and harmless in the dirt, where you can walk right up to it and put your hand next to its hand and prove to the whole laughing world that you were right. In the space of a few seconds, their terror curdled into something almost like joy. Wade started filming. Silas started down the slope toward it. Emmett, and this is on Wade's audio, faint, under everything, Emmett said from up near the ridge, not coming down, don't. Wade, if it's dead, something killed it. Nobody listened to Emmett. Nobody ever listened to Emmett until it was too late to matter. Silas walked down to the body. He stood over it. He looked at the great flat face and the open eyes and the enormous splayed hand. And Wade pushed in close with the phone. And for those few seconds, the two of them were as happy and as doomed as men get, standing over the proof of everything, and the third one stood up on the ridge with the map in his pocket and the exit at his back, begging them quietly to come away. And then the woods screamed and the whole thing came apart. Here's what the footage does not tell you, because the footage cuts. When Silas whipped around at the second scream, he was not turning at empty trees. He was turning because it was already there. A second creature, a live one, near black. The near black of the thing in the last story, enormous, coming down through the timber on the far side of the drainage at a speed that a thing that size has no right to move. It was not sneaking. The screams were it. It was coming, and it was calling as it came. And it had crested the slope and seen, laid out below it in the red dirt, its dead one, the auburn one, and standing over that dead one, 3 humans. And I need you to understand what that looked like from where it stood, because everything that happened after happened for this reason. It did not see 3 friends who had stumbled onto a body. It saw its own kind, dead, and the small hairless things that killed it crouched over the corpse. It did the arithmetic that anything alive would do. The dead one was here. The men were here over it. Therefore the men. There was no version of the next few minutes in which that creature was going to stand at the top of the slope and consider the possibility that the timing was a coincidence. In its grief and its fury, it had a cause and it had a culprit, and the culprit was standing right there with a phone. Silas was already moving before the turn finished. Wade dropped the phone from his eye. That is the cut. That is why the footage ends, the phone comes down, and the world becomes running. Emmett, up on the ridge, was screaming a single word, which was run. And for once in 15 years, both of the other two did exactly what Emmett said. They ran downhill, which was the only direction the ground and the terror allowed, away from the thing coming down at them into the drainage. And they learned in about 10 seconds the thing that every one of the Dark Divide survivors could have told them. You cannot outrun it in the open. It came down that slope behind them in bounds, closing, and the sound it made was not the scream anymore. It was worse. It was close and low and constant, a kind of roar that they could feel in the ground through their boots. Silas was the fastest, and he was pulling ahead. Wade was in the middle. Emmett, who had started highest and had the farthest to come down, was behind. And Emmett was the one shouting directions, because Emmett was the one who, even sprinting for his life down an unmapped slope, was still reading the country. And the country in the marbles has a particular feature. Emmett knew it from the geology in the guidebook he'd read the way he read everything, cover to cover, the night before. Marble mountains have holes, and Emmett, running last, saw what the other two ran straight past, a darkness in the base of a pale outcrop, a low mouth in the rock where a slab of marble had shrugged open a gap into the hillside, half hidden behind brush, exhaling the cold, flat air that caves exhale. He screamed at them to cut for it. It was the worst good idea anyone has ever had. Going into a hole to escape a predator is how prey dies. Every instinct you have says, do not go into the small dark space with no way out. But the thing behind them was the size of a truck and gaining, and it could not surely follow them into a crack in the rock that they had to stoop to enter. That was the whole bet, that it was too big for the door. The bet won. They scrambled into the mouth of the cave, Silas first, then Wade, then Emmett, diving in last as the black shape hit the outcrop above them with an impact they felt in the stone. And it could not follow. It was too big for the door. They heard it out there, roaring, tearing at the brush, throwing itself at an opening that would not take it. And they backed away from the mouth into the dark, deeper, gasping, weeping, alive. and for about a minute they thought that Emmett had saved them. Then Wade, still holding the phone out of pure animal habit, turned on its flashlight to see how far back the passage went. And the beam swept across the floor and the walls of the cave, and Emmett, looking at what the beam showed, said, very quietly, in a voice that had gone completely flat, "Oh no, oh no, no." Because the floor of the cave was worn smooth, not water smooth, not the rounded, rippled shape that flowing water leaves in marble. Traffic smooth, worn down the way the stone steps of an old church are worn down by feet, by the passage of heavy bodies over a long, long time in and out on a path. The walls at shoulder height, at a height well above their own shoulders, were polished and dark where countless flanks had brushed them going by. There were piles of bedding, matted heaps of dry grass and moss and shredded bark arranged, used in hollows off the main passage. And there were bones, a lot of bones, in drifts against the walls, cracked open the long way, the way you crack a bone to get the marrow. And not all of the bones were the bones of deer. And Emmett, who had wanted to be a doctor once and knew what he was looking at, did not say what some of them were, and the others did not ask. And then there was the smell. It had been on the wind up on the ridge, coming and going, bad enough to make Silas gag. In here, it was not coming and going. In here, it was the air itself. That same wet animal and rot reek, but concentrated, lived in, soaked into the stone over generations, the smell of a den that has never once been aired out. It was the smell of the thing that had chased them, but multiplied, layered, old and fresh at once. And Emmett understood what that meant before either of the others did, because Emmett understood everything a few seconds before everyone else, which in that place was not a gift. One animal does not make a smell like that. One animal cannot. That smell was the smell of many over a very long time, and it was coming up at them from the dark ahead the way heat comes up off a road. They had not found a cave, they had found a home. And the thing outside had not chased them into a random hole in a panic. It had chased them, screaming, driving them downhill exactly the way you drive game, and they had run, obedient, terrified, straight through the front door of the place where its whole kind lived. Emmett said later that the worst part of the whole night was that single second of understanding, the second where the relief of escaping the thing outside curdled into the comprehension that the thing outside had wanted them in here, that being too big for the door was the entire point, that the door was not their salvation, it was the mouth of the trap, and the giant behind them was the hand that had fed them into it. And then, from deeper in the mountain, from down the smooth floored dark where the passage sloped away out of the reach of the little phone light, they heard the eyes before they saw them. They heard breathing, more than one set, a shifting of great bodies in the black, unhurried, the sound of things that had heard the roaring at the door and the scrabbling of small feet on their stone, and had woken and turned, and were now looking back up the passage at the three warm, soft, hairless things that had just delivered themselves into the deep. Wade's light caught the first pair of eyes low and far back and threw them into a flat green shine. And then another pair, and then, as their own eyes adjusted and the horror unfolded at the pace of a nightmare, more. Not two, not four, more than they could count in the shaking beam. A whole colony of them down there in the dark under the marble mountains in the hollowed-out heart of the range, where no map went and no light had ever been. And the men were between them and the only door. And the only door had a grieving giant standing in it. This is where the footage would be, if there were footage, and there is a reason there is not. What Emmett understood in the few seconds before the things in the dark decided what to do was airflow. He'd felt the cave breathe when they came in, that flat, cold exhale that told him it was a real cave and not just a pocket. An air that moves has to be going somewhere. A cave that exhales at one mouth is inhaling at another. If there was a draft, there was a second opening, and the draft was coming from deeper in from the direction of the eyes, which meant the way out was also the way toward the colony, which was the worst possible arithmetic. But it was arithmetic, and Emmett was the only one of the three still capable of it. He told them to kill the light. It was, again, the most insane instruction imaginable, to put out the one light you have, 40 feet from a room full of things that want to eat you. But the light was showing the creatures exactly where the men were, and it was showing the men almost nothing useful. And Emmett had understood the one advantage they had left. Those things live in the dark and hunt by the other senses. A bobbing bright light was a target, but it was also, maybe, a thing that could be gotten away from if it went out and moved. He told Wade to turn it off, and he took Wade's hand and Silas's, and he led them, blind by touch, along the wall, toward the breathing, toward the airflow, because that was where the second door was, and there was no other door. I am not going to pretend I can tell you every second of what happened in that dark, because only one man came out to tell it, and he could not tell all of it, and some of what he could tell he should not have had to carry. I can tell you the shape of it. They moved along the cold wall in absolute black with their friends' hands in their hands, past the bedding hollows, through the smell. And the things in the dark moved with them, not attacking, not yet, herding. The same thing the one outside had done. The patient managing of prey by creatures that have done this before and are in no hurry, in a place where the prey has nowhere to go. They felt the air get stronger on their faces. They felt the floor tilt up. And somewhere in there, Silas's hand was torn out of Wade's hand, in the dark, without warning, with a sound. And then Silas was not on the chain anymore, and Emmett would not let them stop. Emmett dragged Wade toward the moving air with everything he had, while Wade screamed his best friend's name into a blackness that did not answer. What Wade could never make anyone understand afterward was how patient the things in the dark were. They were faster than the men. They could see or hear or smell or whatever it is they do down there. And the men were blind and clumsy and loud, tripping on the fallen rock, gasping, weeping. The colony could have ended it in the first 10 seconds. It did not. It moved alongside them in the black, close enough that Wade felt the heat of a body pass his face once, close enough that he heard the wet sound of breathing at the level of his own ear from something that had to be crouching to be that low. And it did not close. It walked them. It let them stumble toward the moving air. And it flowed around them and ahead of them and behind them, herding, correcting, a soft pressure in the dark on either side that kept them on the one line it wanted them on. And Wade understood this is the thing that broke something in him permanently, that the entire time the outcome was already decided. The only question the things in the dark were still resolving was which of the three the debt would be paid with. They were not hunting, they were choosing. And they took their time about it, the way you take your time over something you have done many times before and are in no hurry to finish. And then they chose. Silas's hand did not slip out of Wade's hand. It was taken, one clean, enormous, unhurried pull, sideways and up, out of the chain and into the black, with a sound Wade has never described to anyone and never will. And then the space where Silas had been was just cold moving air, and Emmett's grip clamped down like a vice and hauled Wade forward and would not let him stop, would not let him turn back toward the sound, dragged him bodily toward the draft while Wade screamed his best friend's name into a blackness that did not answer and was never going to answer because the blackness had what it came for. and the transaction was complete. The phone was gone by then. Wade had dropped it, or it had been taken with the hand that was reaching back for Silas. He never knew. That is why there is no more footage. Everything after the 9th second happened where there was no camera, and for most of it, no light. 2 of them reached the second opening. It was a chimney, a slot of gray daylight. Up and to the left, high up a slope of fallen rock. They climbed it with their hands shredding on the marble and came out onto a hillside a quarter mile and a whole world away from where they'd gone in the late gold light of the same afternoon, into air that moved and smelled of pine and not of the dark. And they lay in the open and could not stop shaking. 2 of them, Wade and Emmett, not Silas. And the thing that let them get out, the reason the colony did not simply take all 3 in the dark, the reason the men were allowed to reach the chimney and drag themselves up it into the light, is the same terrible logic that started the whole thing on the ridge. Emmett has thought about it more than anyone should have to, and this is what Emmett believes, and I think Emmett is right. They were never food, not really. The creatures below do not need to chase men into the light. Men wander into that country rarely enough, and the deer are plenty. And a thing that has lived hidden under a mountain for who knows how many generations did not get to stay hidden by eating every hiker it could reach, and leaving a trail of the missing that even a place like the Marbles couldn't absorb. It was never hunger, it was the dead one, the auburn one on the slope, and the fury of the black one that crested the ridge and found men standing over it. In the reckoning of those things, the men had a debt, and the debt was a life for the life they were blamed for, one of theirs on the red dirt, one of ours in the dark. And down in the black, when Silas was pulled off the chain and did not come back, the debt was paid. That is why the other 2 were allowed to reach the chimney and climb up it into the light, instead of simply disappearing the way everyone disappears up there. It was not mercy, it was accounting. The books were balanced, and the 2 who were left were let go to carry the story back up into the daylight world, which, when you think about what that means, is not a comforting thing at all. It means the things under the mountain understood on some level that there would be a story, that there is an up here and a down there, and messages pass between them, and this was one. Wade and Emmett walked out of the Marble Mountains over 2 days, without Silas, without most of their gear, without the phone. They were so far from where they'd started, dropped out the far side of the range by that chimney, that the walk out was its own ordeal. And they did it mostly without speaking, because there was nothing to say that either of them could stand to hear out loud. They reported it the moment they hit the trailhead register box and the first other people they'd seen in days. There was a search, and search and rescue in that country is good and serious, and they went in hard. They found the drainage, they found the auburn body was gone, of course it was gone. The black one was never going to leave its dead lying out for men to cart away. And they found, past that, exactly what you already know they found. Nothing. No cave that anyone could positively pin down. Because here is the cruelty of the Marbles. The range really is full of holes, hundreds of them, most unmapped. And Wade and Emmett had gone into theirs and come out of a different one in blind terror in the dark, and could not agree on where the mouth had been or even which face of the ridge it was on. And you do not send rescue volunteers rappelling down unmapped vertical marble on the word of 2 survivors who are telling you there is a colony of screaming giants living at the bottom. Silas Boone went into the county file as a backcountry disappearance, fall, terrain, presumed drowned in a sump, or lost in a fissure. Exactly the language they use. The same language they used on Ashby, and the hunters and everyone the Dark Divide ever quietly kept, 400 miles north of here, in a different forest, for the same reason. Closed. The phone was recovered. That is a coda. And it is the part that makes people who do not believe any of the rest of it go quiet. Weeks later, on the far side of the ridge, at a trailhead, not the drainage, not the cave, an actual developed trailhead with a gravel lot and a wooden register box, the phone was found sitting on the flat top of a fence post beside the sign-in sheet, out in the open, placed where the first person to walk up could not possibly miss it. Miles from where it was lost, on the other side of a range you cannot casually cross. The battery was long dead. When it was charged, most of the storage was corrupted, wiped, waterlogged, unreadable, as though it had spent those weeks somewhere very cold and very wet. The only file that came off it whole was the last one, 9 seconds, the auburn body, the man walking down to it, the 2 screams out of the trees, the whip around, the cut. Something carried a dead man's phone up out of the deep dark, and across a ridge no man crosses lightly, and set it down, carefully, deliberately, upright on a post at the very edge of the human world, with the one piece of footage that survived left intact, the one piece that shows their dead one and men standing over it. I don't have anything comforting to say about that. If you want to lie awake tonight, lie awake over the fact that that is the behavior of something that wanted the story told, that wanted us to know what it was and what it believed we had done, and what waits at the door of the place where they live for anyone who does it again. Emmett does not go into the mountains anymore, any mountains, not even the small friendly ones near town. Wade does not talk about it except once all the way through to the one person who finally got it out of him. And the thing Wade said that I cannot stop turning over is not about the size of them or the smell or the bones or the eyes coming awake in the dark. It is about the sound. The 2 screams out of the trees, the ones on the footage, the ones the whole internet argues about, everyone trying to decide whether it was a warning or a threat. Wade says it was neither. He says that by the end, down in the black with his hands out in front of him, and his best friend gone off the chain, he finally understood what he had recorded. It was not the creature warning them away. It was the creature calling the ones below, waking them, telling them in whatever passes for language, among things that have lived under a mountain since before we had a word for them, that dinner had walked up to the door and was standing over the body, and to come up out of the dark and collect what it was owed.
That is what is under Marble Mountains, and that is why the footage is only 9 seconds long, and that is why, of 3 friends who went in to find the country nobody walks, only 2 came back out, and only one of them will say a single word about the dark they left the 3rd one in. That is why people are scared to camp in the marbles, and they should be. Real or fake, you decide. I hope you enjoyed these encounters. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.